it was just, in one sense, suck it up. Like, this is just life, and let me just hear them and understand them. And they probably have a really good reason, when actually a lot of times it wasn't. It was, I should have stood up for myself. I should have been able to have sovereignty over my body, my feelings, my thoughts. But I lost that because I had no boundaries growing up.
Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean, and today in this episode, we're going to be talking about boundaries. And joining me is Kent McKean, once again.
Hi.
Hi.
All right, boundaries. So tell me about boundaries. I mean, there's so many definitions for it, I think. So I would love to hear maybe your definition versus some other definitions that are out there.
Yeah. Listen, boundaries, hot topic, right? Like a lot of people talking about boundaries. I remember way back, I don't even remember how long ago this was. I think I was a young adult and talking to someone about growing up with, parents who, were addicts or, used substance and everything, and was told to read the book Codependency No More, and then on the heels of that one to read a book called Boundaries.
Okay.
And I remember at the time feeling like, okay, there's a lot of good stuff in here, but I'm not sure it actually changed anything for me. It made sense in my mind, and I thought, okay, these are things that I recognized they were things that I needed and things that sounded good, sounded better than what I was doing at the time. But I think it could have just been where I was, in my life. It didn't impact me. It didn't change my world, my life.
What were you doing at the time? You said it was probably helpful for what I was, or better than what I was doing at the time. But what is it that you were doing at the time?
I was still in the role and in the idea of, this is my family. This is the way it's always going to be. I have to, put myself wasn't mattering as much. I just didn't even have any thought of self, honestly. And that it was more that I had to mitigate the things that were coming from my family of origin, right? So if I would get, I didn't even have the words then, right? But if I would get upset or what I would call now dysregulated, or something would happen, something that maybe would happen to me again that had happened before and it didn't feel good, then it was just kind of in my mind like, this always happens. This is just the way they are. This always happens. Like, I hate that it's like this.
And it was sort of a dead end.
And what do? You just kind of get mad about it. And eventually you're not mad. Depending on how long you're going to hold this grudge, then eventually you're not mad. Or you maybe have a big blow up and you fight and then you're like, oh, okay, now we're going to just move on. But the behavior never really changed and the reactions never really changed. It was just a lot of reactivity. No than any idea of what someone else had been through, and that I was reacting not to always what was happening in the moment, but a build up of what had happened over a lifetime. So again, completely unaware of those things. So the word boundaries and the concept of, around boundaries have been in my sphere of knowledge for 20 plus years. And I would say it was only when I really started doing mind change that it clicked for me that, I did need boundaries. But at that point, I didn't love the languaging I was hearing around it.
What was the languaging you were hearing that you didn't love?
Well, maybe even it was my perception of it. and what I was seeing when other people were kind of boundarying up, right?
Okay.
So I would experience, saying something, doing something, interacting with someone. And there would be kind of this, if maybe someone or me or something overstepped a line that I didn't know existed or that another person didn't know existed. We had stepped over some sort of invisible line. And now there was a very kind of whoosh, like, you're pushing my boundaries, or you're not being respectful of my boundaries. And it was like, oh, okay. You're like, whoo. So I didn't know that I had a lot of languaging around it other than hearing that you need boundaries. They're the only way to really, keep yourself safe. If you don't have boundaries, people are going to walk all over you. They're going to use you. They're going to abuse you. They're going to hurt you. So you need boundaries, and you need to keep those boundaries and not let anybody push through those boundaries.
It sounds very reactionary rather than responding and figuring out a better way of living.
Right. Which, when I first started in this mind change journey, I was working on being less reactive and more in control, or at least observation of the why behind it, or the noticing in my body, a lot more personal responsibility. And boundaries seemed to just emerge out of that a little bit more naturally, versus some of the other things that I was doing and hearing around boundaries felt, very like, whew, harsh. You almost felt hurt by pushing past someone else's boundaries.
So there's a line that you didn't know about. You cross whatever line that is. There's a reaction, and the reaction is almost like an explosion at you.
Yeah, that's what it felt like.
Okay.
So then I did this sort of interesting dance around, I don't know if I want to have boundaries.
Because you didn't want to react that way.
Right. I didn't want to come off that way, to be like what I felt like was lashing out. It sort of felt like, I do a lot of metaphor, a lot of visuals, right? And it kind of felt like when someone's like, da 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 da, and they're, like, hey, have anything you want. And you reach out for this particular cookie and someone slaps your hand and you're like, wait, what happened? Like, I thought I could, not that cookie. Oh, I didn't know I couldn't touch that cookie. So I really, maybe that's a terrible analogy, but that's kind of what it felt like for me when I was interacting with people who claimed to have boundaries.
Okay.
Now, that being said, I do think boundaries are very, very important. But when I talk about boundaries, I've noticed it tends to be a little bit different than when other people talk about boundaries. And so I've worked a little bit more on my personal definition, and also figuring out what that looks like in my life, sounds like in my life, how to communicate that. And I love the little quote that boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me at the same time. And I really liked that when I first read that. I was like, the reason I really like that is because it's about love. And I think that's so important. And for all the boundary movements out there, which I do feel like it's better to have boundaries that may even be a little more, bitey than to have none, right? But I think that these bitey boundaries, I like to call them electric fences, right? Or barbed wire fences, or thick, thick walls. And for me,
let me clarify. That's the boundary that maybe other people are putting out there.
Correct.
Okay.
That's how I experienced other people's version of boundaries.
Is an electric fence, is a barbed wire, is a thick wall that, like, you can't get past this. You're not supposed to be in here, that kind of a thing.
Right. And it makes having relationships with those people very difficult.
Okay.
And so, I kind of took a step back from all of it, and I was like, so what's going on here? And I feel like from a mind change perspective, there's reasons why we either came into this world not knowing what healthy boundaries looked like. I think if we just had healthy relationships, regulated, healthy relationships, none of us would talk about boundaries. It wouldn't be a word that really existed. It would just be communication, mutual respect, communication, sovereignty, agency, and the same for others.
Okay.
It would be innate. We would do this.
So then if that would be like just the natural, that's how we would live. If all of that, what is it that creates maybe a lack of, I don't want to use boundaries, but a lack of sovereignty over myself and letting other people have sovereignty over that? What creates that?
Oh boy, so many things. Childhood. Our childhood. And if you think about it, not to just vilify parents, because that's never our goal.
We are parents.
We are parents, right? We have parents. They have parents. It's a funny thing. No, it's not really to vilify that or to say that everything's from childhood. But if you think about it, and I really think and hope we're evolving. So I will say that now, if you were to scroll through Instagram or, talk to someone in the realm of emotional well-being or health, a lot of the current talk around boundaries does feel a lot more healthy
than it did 10 years ago,
10, 15
20
years ago, right? Yeah. So I do think we're shifting. And I think that that's great and that's important. But to get back to the why we shouldn't need to have them in the first place, but why we do and why we have this conversation, you've got to think about how we treat children. So often and for generations, and I know it was this way growing up for me, children were the be seen and not heard. They're dumb. They are, they're going to get themselves hurt. They're going to get themselves in trouble. They don't know anything. They need adults to show them what to do and to tell them what to do and to make sure that they go the right direction. There's just this general feeling that children are just like these walking idiots, that are gonna make every bad choice available if left to their own devices.
And I'll add to that, if that is what we hold as parents, as adults looking at children or the young, then, and that's the identity they're gonna claim because that's what we're giving them.
Yes. Because as parents, we have such an important role and we have so much influence on them as littles. So really before the age of 11,
right.
We are developing their belief systems, their self-belief systems and identities, their filters. We're adding to those. And there's other influences as well. School, churches, TV, now social media. There's a lot of influences.
Sure.
But by and large, up to age 11, parents are the primary ones doing this for children. So when we say things to our children, like, if it's a good thing you listen to me. It's a good thing I'm here for you because if I wasn't, you'd probably end up in a ditch somewhere. Or, it's a good thing I'm looking out for you. See, if you listen to me, then, and oftentimes what we're doing without even realizing it is we're undermining the child's sovereignty. We're undermining the child's intuition, their gut, the development of this sort of self-sustaining system. We're undermining it. We're growing a self-sustaining individual, sovereign individual.
Okay, let me pause you there because I think a lot of people may not fully understand this idea of a child being a sovereign, being their own sovereign being, having intuition, rather than, I think a lot of people probably think that, no, we train this into them. Like children don't know anything. They learn everything. So we have to teach them everything about themselves and about life and all of this versus inherently they have this knowing, this gut, this understanding, this identity that is them prior to the training, although there's overlap.
There is. And yes, for sure, we are in we are charged with their upbringing, their training in one way, right? In one sense. But we're meant to do it with them, in partnership with them, which then gives them that respect and starts the process of autonomy. So often we're treating children as if they're these deaf, dumb, blind, like children that are going to just careen into disaster at any moment. But when you're 18, there you go, out the door, you're going to be fine now. And there's this like, oh, no wonder there's failure to launch, right? It doesn't just happen like that.
Right, because training, it changes over time, but training 0 to 11 versus 12 to 18 versus even further. Yeah.
Yeah, let's think. I'm just making this up as I go along, but think about if this is the way we trained airline pilots, it's just, you're probably going to crash. If you don't listen to me, you're going to crash. No, you can't fly the plane. I have to fly the plane because every time you try to fly the plane, you're going to crash, and like, watch the way I do it and do it this way and always this way. But then come a certain age or okay, now you've had this many hours. Now I'm just going to put you in the driver's seat. And they're going to probably crash quite a few times, which with airline pilots, I don't think they get to crash quite a few times. But I'm saying like we have to actually allow them to crash, not airline pilots, but children in safe environments and in regulated environments and knowing that they're going to do that and protect them and be training them, but knowing that we're working with them in this process. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a parenting podcast all of a sudden, but part of the reason that we have this conversation around boundaries as adults is we don't respect what would be natural boundaries with children.
Can you share a little bit more specifically about maybe the natural boundaries that you that were maybe walked through or not taught to you, or your own sovereignty, things like that, maybe just to share a little bit specifically?
Yeah. So I think, I'll even take it a little bit more personally to our children. I know that we told our children they needed to hug like strangers.
Like when we would be in a crowd that we knew the people, not strangers on the street.
Didn't know everybody, but we were in a group setting where we were all there for the same purpose. And we would be like, okay, if someone comes up to you, hug, give them a hug, say hi, right? Mm-hmm. Smile, talk to them. And there's this school of thought that is like, you're training them to be friendly. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't help. It doesn't allow for that child to have sovereignty. Like, I don't know about you. If you've ever walked into a room or a group of people and you get an interesting vibe about someone.
Sure.
Yeah, I do too. And there is parts of us that we will shut down if we've been taught out of that. And that doesn't actually serve us in the long run. Now, maybe that's not a bad person, right? I don't really believe that there are bad people, but there are people who do bad things. But very often, what we perceive as bad might be something really dysregulated in that person. And for us, in the moment, they aren't a safe place for us because they're not a safe place for themselves in the moment.
So sometimes when we get this vibe, this whatever, oftentimes it just means there's, for some reason, whether in us or in them or a combination, there's not safety in that dynamic at that moment.
And what we're doing to the children is basically saying, like, you don't get to read. It doesn't matter. If you don't want to hug somebody, you're being a certain way, rather than maybe considering that child has a feeling. Like, I know the way we were with our kids when they were very little, it didn't matter if they had a feeling, actually. It was like, do it.
Yeah, it was like, this is the way that you need to be.
Obey us.
Mm-hmm. And they were like mega obedient children when they were little, right? We'd get comments of like, hey, your kids obey so well. They really listen to you, all of that stuff.
They were overly controlled.
And then when they hit that 11, that 8, 9, 10, 11, it was like, I've had enough.
Well, we've started to change too.
That's true.
So that was really helpful. But for sure. So that's a small way. And you could have the school of thought of like, I want friendly. It's good if my child is friendly, they will be friendly as an adult, and that will help them in life. I agree. But do you want your child to be friendly to the person who's about to rob them? Do you want your children to be friendly to the person who might walk all over them in a job situation?
Well, okay, so again, personal. I grew up very similarly to the way that we initially were raising our children, right? Of like, be friendly. This is the way you need to be around people and with new people. Introduce yourself, give hugs, give, whatever, handshake, things like that. And so I just learned to do, and to, in one sense, it wasn't conscious, but like push aside any feelings, any things, just do the right thing. I grew up that way. And then I ended up, as you very well know, putting myself in situations where for years and decades, getting walked on, getting treated certain ways at different times that I just swallowed is probably the best way to look at it. Is that it was just, in one sense, suck it up. Like, this is just life. And let me just hear them and understand them. They probably have a really good reason, when actually a lot of times it wasn't. I should have stood up for myself. I should have been able to have sovereignty over my body, my feelings, my thoughts. But I lost that because I had no boundaries growing up.
Right. And we should be teaching children how to navigate these things as young people.
How do we do that?
I know, right? Well, again, not the parenting podcast,
sure.
But so that's where this stuff gets started in many different ways. I think from my childhood, we had very different childhoods. From my childhood, something I remember was a unspoken rule, which I can see now led to some other, things in my adult life that you could say this would be a good thing to have a boundary around, was don't talk about what's happening in the family. And like, it's our business.
Family drama.
Right. It's our business. Nobody needs to know. We don't want anyone thinking we are poor, even though we were. Like don't ask for help. Don't look vulnerable, that kind of thing. So with that, again, I don't remember that ever actually being said, but I saw it modeled. So it's not like my mother ever sat me down and was like, don't talk about your business, don't da. But I saw it modeled when she would be asked how things were going, or are you okay, or whatever. This was during the pretty extreme physical abuse of my childhood with my stepfather. And she would, fake the funk, right? Which I watched as a child. So then getting the idea of like, oh, this is the way we're supposed to be, which of course now I know, like, no, you don't keep harm secret. Like, you don't keep that secret. I would want my children speaking out if they're being harmed in any way. Learning that in my family and thinking that was the way led me into other situations that I did not speak about. Really horrific things that happened to me that I didn't speak up about. Now, I personally think, and this could be very triggery or controversial, but I think had I been offered, and it wasn't like it was my family had it in abundance and they just weren't giving it to me. So I do know that my parents didn't have this for themselves either in their childhood. But had I been given appropriate modeling in that situation of like, we don't allow anyone to touch us in a way that is, harmful or doesn't feel good or whatever. And if someone does, you speak that up to another safe adult. I think that I would have gotten into a lot less victimized situations later in life. So for me, I think being victimized as a child very easily led me into being victimized in a lot of other situations.
Well, it trained you
Right.
to live, feel, suppress, whatever in a certain way.
And even if I thought someone was you know, like if I got a feeling about someone, I was like, you can't say anything. You can't go anywhere. Like you just have to don't make anyone uncomfortable. That was another one of those things. Like, don't make anyone uncomfortable. Don't rock the boat. Like, and so I think that those are the ways that we learn to deny ourselves and our nature as children.
Do you think it's more like the denying self and your nature, this idea of boundaries being crossed over? Do you think it has more to do with how we're not taught or how we are taught things? In other words, we're directed to be a certain way versus no one's directing us in any way.
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think it's both I think it can be both in one family. It can be happening where they're modeling and telling you and teaching you one thing, and not telling you and teaching you another thing, right? That can be both. Does that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think all of us have something like this in childhood, right? There are no perfect parents because there's no perfect childhoods. And so again, it's not to say parents are to blame. Say, I don't blame my parents for this, but I do understand. So this is where the difference started to happen for me and mind change, was because once I started healing my history, changing those neural pathways, changing the way that things looked, changing my stories, really going back and seeing from different perspectives, then I started to come more, the first and most important thing was I saw my worth and value. And I saw that it had always been there. And that I was worth loving, being loved, being protected, being honored, that I was worth speaking up, that my worth and value, when I would go back and I would see that, and I would see myself differently in a situation where I came into a situation full of worth and value and I would just shine, then everyone around me would act different. And so then my gut would speak up and everyone just listened. And my intuition was just there and my worth and value were there. And I was so valuable and worthy that even if there were a bad man or bad woman or whatever, that they would change. Like, not because I had to do anything, I just had to show up in my most amazing self, and then they would just change. And that's, of course, the mind change work that we do. So then when the boundary conversation started to happen around me, and of course I started to delve into the mental health fields and everything like this, and so the boundary conversation was always a strong one, right? Or I'd get clients and yeah, I had been in therapy, they told me I needed boundaries. I've tried to have these boundaries and people just keep blowing through my boundaries.
Or I'm pushing people away or...
Yes, yeah, so many different things. I started to realize okay, this looks different and feels different for me. So I think I must be doing it differently. And I think that came out of this idea of worth and value. Because before, so even though any person, therapist worth their salt would have met me and been like, ooh, you're behind thick walls, right? I was very walled off emotionally. So I had boundaries. They were, 6 foot thick concrete walls around certain parts of me to protect me from the things that had happened to me as a child. So I did have boundaries that had these thick walls.
At least the boundaries in
Right.
definition of the way that often therapy or different people or reactionary things might
And
call
what
it.
I realized was that I was imprisoned. That the walls that I had built to keep me safe were now just blocking me from anything real. And I had to take some ownership of those walls that had gotten built. Not guilt, not shame, not blame, but just understanding that is all I had at the time. The only knowledge I had at the time to protect myself as a child. And I did that. And so, okay. And then it was, okay, now as an adult, are these walls serving me? And they were not. They were imprisoning me. They were keeping me from fully showing up as a friend, as a mother, as a wife, all of these different things. They were keeping me from fully showing up because there was part of me still walled off.
So what do you believe then? People that maybe hold boundaries in the sense that mind change does not kind of follow that road, but the whole walling up and, you've crossed my boundary and the reaction and all of that. What would you say that people that are that tight on their boundaries, like you're crossing my boundary, do they have like a deep sense of their worth? Are they like, where's the line there?
I would, to make a generalization, because I can't speak to the reason everyone is doing that. But I know for clients that I've worked with, and even myself, when I had a boundary that was like this electric fence, it was because I was not safe.
You didn't feel safe.
Right.
And so it was to keep other people out.
It was to keep other people from reaching me.
Okay.
Because people aren't safe. You're going to hurt me again. So
what does that mean about
fence.
you?
Well, it means I'm still in a victimized state. I'm still in a hurt, wounded, vulnerable state.
And so if you're in a hurt, wounded, vulnerable state and you put up barbed wire or electric fence or whatever, how is that gonna help you?
Well, okay, so what the mind says, what the subconscious mind says is, well, then I won't be hurt anymore. But then all it really does is wall off your hurt and keep it there and keep it, and then nobody gets through.
And then you're actually imprisoning yourself. You're locked into the pain and the hurt and the insecurity and the whatever that you've held on to.
And because those fences, the energy, the electricity that's moving through them is the electricity of pain, the electricity of hurt, of abuse maybe, or of being walked on or whatever. And it vibrates at that level all the time. And so you're surrounded, if you think about this, you think you're safe, but you're surrounded by this, vibration of and the victimization. And so it sort of keeps you in there. So I realized after having done mind change for a while, like, I don't feel the need to be safe anymore. I just was. Or you can't, unless you see my worth and value and treat me the way my worth and value deserves, you're not allowed to come in. I was like, it just didn't resonate with me anymore. It was like, if you you'll know, it's clear. I don't need to, there's not fences. It'll be clear. And eventually I was trying to describe this to a client one time. This was so many years ago. And we were in a boundary conversation. And I believe it was because she had been through a lot of therapy, and there was this whole conversation around boundaries, and we had done this work, and we were at this sort of crossroads that she couldn't really, the way she was being told to do boundaries wasn't lining up with the work that we did. And so I was trying to explain to her, and I was like, you know what? Maybe it would just help for you to understand the way I see my boundaries. And it was the first time I'd ever even put words to it. And so I will share that now and see if it resonates with anybody. The way I view my being, I suppose, if I'm going to visualize it, is I am ensconced in this white farmhouse. It's just a white farmhouse for me. And it's got a big wraparound porch, and it has the pillars, and what it also has, and it's 2-story, and it's beautiful, and there's light glowing in the windows all the time. And outside of that house so the house is not my boundary. The house is just this thing that's built in out of love, out of desire, out of abundance. It just is. It's just there. And outside of this farmhouse are vast green pastures, just vast green pastures. And around these vast green pastures are white picket fences. The 3 board kind. Nothing fancy, not the crisscrossy, They're maybe 4 feet high. They're not there to keep monsters out or to keep anything else, monsters in. They are literally just to be very clear about my property lines. That's it. And they make me happy because I think they're very beautiful. So I was like, so here's the thing with this is the way I do boundaries. My feeling is that if someone wants to come in to and it's also not that I'm safe in my house because that's the only place I'm safe. This entire property is safe, if you want to call it that. And I don't even deem what's outside of those property lines unsafe. I just know this particular plot of land has rules. Now, they're not like hard, fast, like aggressive rules. Remember, it's not barbed wire fence, it's picket fence. So it's not sharp, it won't bite you, you won't get hurt coming through. But there's general rules, which is to be on this property, if you cross over that fence, as you move through these pastures toward the house, you will more and more and more be revealed to yourself. And if you don't like what you see, then you probably will start to not feel like you belong here. Now you see, me, I have nothing to do with this process. The lines do it for me, right? I'm not out there being like, unsafe person, anything like that. I don't even have to watch. I'm not watching, I'm not looking. If someone makes it to my door and is like, hey, I'm like, oh, visitor. I'm not afraid. I don't think anyone bad out there is out there to get me. I know that if someone has made the trek through the fence, through the pastures, up the stairs to that house, then they are in a place that we can have a conversation. That's the way I see boundaries. Now, could someone do that whole trek and make it to me and be someone that isn't maybe the healthiest relationship to have right now? Absolutely. But I would like for us to be able to talk about that for various reasons. And I feel it is my belief that if they have gone through that trek, that they will be in a more open place to see it themselves. And so I just hold that. Now, I didn't know that all existed till I explained it to her. And I was like, let me tell you what's happening in my head. But the more that I explained that to her, the more that felt so real to me. And I just breathed a sigh of like, so that does it for me. It really does it for me. And it also allows for all types of people to come in and out. Because I've seen oftentimes people's boundary lines will only allow for a very particular subset of people, of what they think these people are like. And I've noticed that time and time again, they seem disappointed in what their boundaries are producing. And so with this, it allows for lots of different types of people and, different things and different conversations and at different times in their journey to come in. But it also is, for me, the ability to say, hey, you don't actually have to be here if you don't want to be here. You seem quite uncomfortable with where you're at right now. If someone were to come on my property and just start laying into me or, destroying things, then that's a good conversation to have of like, you don't seem very happy here. Like, this is a happy place. You don't seem very happy here. You might be more comfortable on the other side of the white picket fence.
And the reason you're able to have those kind of conversations, of course, this is metaphor, but still, even in life, the reason you're able to have those conversations is because you know your property. In other words, you know yourself, you know your value, you know your worth. And if someone isn't going to see that, that's okay. It doesn't devalue you.
No.
It doesn't take anything away from you. So you don't need to react in a certain way or push them out. naturally, from what I'm hearing you say, they will make their way back outside the boundary lines because this doesn't serve them either. They're looking to tear down. They're looking to do something, and they can't do that here.
Yeah, they will have made a very long trek just to tell me they don't like me. Be like, oh, you walked all this way to say that, or to feel that. Like, that's a long way to come. You needed a glass of lemonade on your way back out? Like, that feels so much better to me. That feels like a life that is giving and receiving and open, and I don't have to be hypervigilant.
Okay, but let me ask you, there are going to be people listening and watching who are like, yeah, that all sounds great, but like there are bad people out there and they could attack you and they could do this. If someone's trying to attack you, not physically, but, attack you in your relationship, your life, or whatever, and they have their own stuff and they're coming at you, with a metaphorical knife or a metaphorical rock or something like that, giving them a glass of lemonade doesn't fend them off. How do you deal with that?
Right, sure. And I know that a lot of bad things have happened. Listen, I've personally had rotten things happen to me at the hands of other people. But I feel like so much happens energetically first. And I didn't know that before. I had no idea that we even did energy at all, or nonverbal cues or anything like that. The more that I've worked on myself, the more that I've come into alignment with, and listen, I'm not done. I hope I don't need to say that. We're never done. It unlayers. But the more that I've done that, the less of those kinds of people I ever interact with. So why is that?
That's a great question. Does it have anything to do with your self-worth and your value? And
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I'm not going to run into those kinds of people because I don't vibrate at a level of they're going to be able to do it. They're not going to get any satisfaction from it. Because frankly, if they're going to come at me and they want to like try to tear me down and yell at me or whatever, they cannot help this, but I'm going to be like, whoa, what has happened to this person? Like, I'm going to have compassion for them. Now, does that mean I don't protect myself? Listen, if someone's coming at me with a knife, for real, that feels so out of reality for me, to be honest. I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think, and so I can hear someone out there be like, oh, you think your vibe's just going to protect you? You think your energy's just going to protect you? There are crazy people out there. Yes, for good reason. And I think that I energetically do not fit the mold. The
prey mold of a
perpetrator.
Yeah.
I just don't fit that any longer. I used to, but I don't anymore. So the funny thing is, when I stopped feeling like a victim, I stopped being a victim. And those situations just didn't arise. Those kind of people weren't in my life anymore. I wasn't subject to that anymore at all.
Can I actually ask you about this and your perspective on it? Because in our relationship, and this is way before mind change, way before, the healing journey and all of that, there were a lot of boundaries both of us had issues with, right? There was enmeshment in me. There was whatever you want to call it in you, right? There was just different things. And so in the beginning stages of our relationship, there was a lot of, I did a lot of self-attack, like internal self-attack. I didn't really even recognize that at the time, but there was a lot of inner turmoil that I just kind of suppressed and put away. But because of that, there was a lot of judgment inside of me coming at you. Mm-hmm. So in one sense, there was a lot of attack, and it was covert, and it was, whatever you want to call it. And then you, as someone who had sort of like not spoken up and all of that, what you said, just allowed it. Right. And so again, it was this, undealt with stuff in me coming at you. Then you found your worth. And it's interesting because although I had so much to work through still with judgment and all of that and throwing it at you, you weren't taking it the same way anymore. But I still had my own stuff, so it was still coming out. But it's interesting that when you started getting well, that is when I started pulling back, if you remember. And it was this downward, spiral of depression and whatever, but I was pulling away. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could speak to this whole thing, of course, and then there's back and forth and, me finding my own fight, my own self and all of that. But maybe you can talk about that for a minute, like the differences of what happens when you're already in a relationship and then you find your worth.
Yeah, hey, it makes things kind of tough because you just don't fit. All of us get into a rhythm. We actually, to use the correct term, we trance because we're doing it automatically without even thinking about it. You say this and then I say that, and then you do this and then I do that. And it's just this cyclical thing, and it just goes round and round and round. And very, 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 very often, it's similar to one or both dynamics in those people's childhood, right? So look, we were playing out our own childhood stuff with each other in very different circumstances. Like, you are nothing like the kind of men that I was around younger. Just nothing like. You were not dangerous in that way, right? You weren't abusive. You weren't a substance user. You weren't, there was a lot of things, right?
I don't think I knew what anger even meant at that point in my life.
You never got angry. You never hollered or yelled or raised your voice. Like, it was such different dynamic. So I'm thinking, oh, you're different. And you did it differently, but there was still attack. Mm-hmm. Now, the attack was coming out of insecurity. I think the attacks always were coming out of insecurity, but the attack looked different. Mm-hmm. So I got sides, what do you call that? When something hits you in the side swiped?
T-boned?
Anyway, I don't remember the word for it, but I was just like, whoa, how am I feeling the same way about myself that I was feeling through, physically being abused or neglected or, whatever, that I am when you're not doing those things, because there was still attack coming. You would tear down, certain things about my character or my family or whatever, right? You don't do that anymore. And I did plenty too. So.
Well, yeah. And it's out of insecurity. It's out of all of that other stuff.
Right. Well, then I would yell or would try to fight back, in this way.
Super foreign to me.
Which was so foreign to you, which made you feel even more afraid of me, which made you lash back out even more at me because that just triggered your insecurity more. And you see, we were doing so many of the same things that we saw in our childhood with people who couldn't have been any more different than we had in childhood. But we found each other that way. So that's what I'm talking about, is that energetic thread, that nonverbal thing, that thing that we recognized something in each other. Now, not to say that it's only our trauma that brought us together, but there were very familiar things. And so often we are drawn to what is familiar. And so we find ourselves in these situations over and over again, and we think what we need is stronger boundaries. But what we really need is to work through ourself, who we really are, and take back the power that we've given other people to define us, trigger us, all of these different things, and be the worth. And then our vibration changes. And then the people who recognize us change.
And what happens then with people that you're in relationship with, right? Whether it's a child or whether, an adult child, or whether it's a friend, like a long-term friend, and all of a sudden you start changing, or family members, like where do boundaries and all of that come into play there? Mind change boundaries when you're already in relationship. Because I hear that when you shifted what's inside of you, different people are going to be attracted to you, and different kinds of people are going to be repelled, right? The people that maybe you would have pulled in before that are negative or whatever, repelled. What do you do with situations where you're already in a relationship?
Well, it still calls out different people. It just calls out the different people in those people.
The different parts of them.
So for instance, do you define yourself as, I was born insecure?
No.
Not at all, right? But you were doing a lot of insecurity, and a lot of the attack that was happening was out of insecurity.
Yeah.
So my change, my worth and value was calling out to a different part of you that is in you. There's always been in you. And it was calling it out. Now that's the boundary line. And we had those talks early on where it was like, I'm not going to yell anymore. I'm not going to yell anymore. It just that's not my thing. I have nothing to fight about anymore. So I really stopped, just like, I'm not going to yell anymore. It just didn't feel like it was the thing to do anymore. And
I wish I could have done that as fast as you I'm not going to be insecure anymore.
well, and listen, it wasn't, I did a lot of work, people. Like, I did a lot of work. It wasn't just overnight and instantaneous. It did happen quite fast. But, it was because I couldn't do it. I was dying. I had pretty big stakes. I had really, really big stakes. And I don't recommend getting to that level before you're willing and able to change. But that was my either or. And so when that happened, then energetically I was calling out a higher you. And the conscious part of me was being able to speak. And this is the biggest difference. So if you've heard nothing else, I think this is the biggest difference. I was able to communicate what you might call a boundary, or it was just really communicating worth and value from a place of worth and value. Also recognizing worth and value in you. That changes everything.
And that's a very, very different driver when it comes from this is what I need you to do or this is what I'm going to do, but it's based on fear or pushing out or whatever, versus the exact same thing, quote unquote, boundary that's coming from value in yourself and value in the other person.
It allowed me to understand the ways I was complicit in the pain that was happening in our relationship. I was complicit. And I didn't take that in a guilty, shameful, bad way. I was just like, oh, this was my part of allowing it to keep happening. And this is what I did in response to it. So being able to own that, still say, and this behavior is actually not okay. Like, I see why you're doing it. I understand it. You may not even know like why you're doing it. But over here, in my green pastures, we don't do that. So you are more than welcome to continue to do that. See, so often boundaries are a way to control other people's behaviors. You can't do that to me. You can't do that. You shouldn't be that way. That's a boundary, right? Like, you crossed a boundary. Listen, you just go over there and do it all you want. On the other side of that white picket fence, you be as crazy as you want to be. Do you over there, okay? Here, in this space where we are, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. And the reason isn't that it's not going to work isn't because you're bad. It's because it doesn't honor you and it doesn't honor me. And if you're not in a place to hear that, take that, but see, I communicated it to you. So it's not like it's an invisible line. It's not like it's an unknown line. It's very well communicated.
Sure. But especially if we're talking about the boundaries that you say, the healthy boundaries, I value you boundaries with us, I did take that as a threat, as ultimatums, as, in one sense, what I heard, and this is my filter was, so you're saying, unless this changes, we're not in relationship. You're saying you're cutting me out if. You're saying whatever it is, right? You're saying I'm bad because of. Those are all my own filters. And then what actually happened is when I was able to work through my own stuff, and still always doing that, I finally can hear what it is you were actually saying.
Yeah.
Out of love, out of understanding. And then actually accept that, and then that changes the dance even further.
Yes, thankfully. But I know that it doesn't work like that for a lot of people. You did take it as a threat. You did take it 100%. As an ultimatum. You threw massive internal, external fits about it, not the kind of fits like toddlers have or anything, but just you really put you in some spirals and some dark places. Yeah, a lot of shutdown. And for me, this was my work. I needed to allow you to do that because you have choice, you have sovereignty. You do have the choice to do that. I didn't make you do that. And that's where when you sit in worth and value, I can do two things at once. I can hold compassion and I can love you and I can feel very compassionate for the pain that you're in without relaxing like the worth and value that you're being called to. I can understand I didn't cause that, even if you think I did. That's your response. Now listen, you're more than welcome to come up and you may do this. You may see that white picket fence and you may run into it hardcore over and over and over and over again and bash your head into it and bash your head into it. I can't stop you from doing that. It's your choice if you do that. You get to, in your own mind, in your own body, based on your own filters, you get to make meaning for yourself on what that white picket fence is. You can even turn it into a walled off, double security, electrified fence with armed gunmen on the other side. You can see it that way, you can feel it that way, and that has nothing to do with me. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that still for me it's a white picket fence. You can still hurt yourself on it. You can still throw yourself on it. You can still impale yourself on it. And that has nothing to do with me. And I would be very sad. But it doesn't mean that I caused that or that you were disrespecting my boundaries. That's you. That's happening out of you. And I can hold me and keep my worth and value and say in this space that we're going to do us together, this behavior doesn't honor either of us. And so it won't be tolerated here. And then you get to do what you're going to do.
So from a mind change perspective, can you explain how do you hold you? How do you hold that worth, that value, that beautiful property? How do you hold that if someone is like bashing themselves up against it? How do you continuously hold you in that light?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work. Mm-hmm. I've done so much work. I've done so many sessions. I have unlayered and continue to unlayer this process. And it is, listen, so again, if you've listened to this podcast, you know I am estranged from my mom. But this is part of it. At any point, she is welcome to cross those, fields of green. At any point. I do believe that for her, the revealing process to cross those fields is just too vulnerable. It's too painful currently. And that's why she doesn't. So she doesn't do that. And I respect that. That's the other thing too. I don't sit over in my White House and cuss out the people and judge the people who aren't willing to make the trek. Not willing to, whatever. I respect they have very good reason for doing that. And also it doesn't mean I'm far, far, far to get to. It doesn't mean that either. It's just that I know that the space that I hold and try to inhabit the majority of the time, it's not like I'm always camped out in my White House. I'm down in the what do you call those? Trenches with everybody else quite often, guys. But I've taken so much time to build that. It has real memories hanging on the walls, where I have gratitude, where I have smiles with everybody that is in my life. I have pages and pages and pages of documented history of who I am and where I come from and the worth and the value that has been established, that I've lived, that I've seen, that I've smelled, that I've heard, that I've tasted. So it's very real, but it did take time. Now, I couldn't boundary my way to that. I had to do the internal work. I had to unwind and rewire those traumatic things that happened to me as a child. I had to change my neurobiology so that I could change then my nervous system, so that I could then actually send out different energetic vibes, right? Or vibes, not the greatest word, but energetic signals. So I see a lot of people trying to achieve that through these really hard boundaries. See, for me, the boundaries naturally occurred when I did the work.
So it's like you have these, again, metaphorically, you have these like walls and these electric fences and barbed wire and all this stuff. And then when we do the inner work, when we deconstruct all the neural pathways and then the negativity and the stuff that we've been holding on to, the beliefs, the problems, the issues, it's like we're deconstructing that whole property with all the walls, and it's just like tearing it all down. And then once we have that worth, that inherent thing that's already there, that we don't have to build, all we have to do is take down the walls. When we recognize that it's already there, this beautiful property all of a sudden almost like grows up.
I feel like it's almost always been there. Then you just find it.
I love that.
Oh, there it is. It's been there, it's waiting, and everyone's is probably going to look different, feel different, and that's okay. That one's mine. And, I think that I almost imagine, and so if you're out there and you're like, this sounds great, but I just don't even think it's possible. There's bad people out there, and you don't know my mom, like, right? You don't know my mother. You don't know my husband. You don't know this friend. You don't know my boss. You don't know what they do to me. And you're absolutely right. I don't. And if you're coming with that, I'm so sorry, because I can hear and I know you're in pain. And I know that your objective is to not hurt anymore. And so you know what? This idea that we have, even this construct around boundaries that we have now, let it be your bridge. Go ahead, put up those fences for now. Put up those walls, electrify your fences. But don't let that be the end. Don't let that be the end. Let that create space for you to do the work, to go deeper, to dig into those things, those beliefs, those things you don't even know they're there. I didn't even have any clue of half of what was inside, the ways that I thought. I'd done it for so long, to me it was like, the sky is blue. For me, there are certain things where I was difficult to love. I got my worth and my value, and I earned my place in this world by caring for others and not myself. Like those were some of the many, 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 many programs that I did. And so I kept finding situations and relationships and jobs and stuff that aligned with that. And at some point I had to clear enough space to take some personal responsibility. And when I did that, and really worked through those things, a lot of that stuff changed. Doesn't mean I still don't have trigger points. I have children.
And
they continue to reveal, and a husband. and I'm still with family who don't live in their white picket fence houses. Like they're, it's just they haven't found that yet. They're still in reaction to the wounded and hurt histories they have. And so listen, you spend enough time out there, it gets hard. I get that, and it gets hard. But that's why it's so important to have these places to come back to, and these real memories to repeat and to find. And anyone out there who's done mind change for any significant amount of time knows this happens. It's almost like you cross to the other side, where you're not working on all the problems anymore. And it's this thing where you get to finally look back and see how far you've come. And you realize, oh, I wasn't clearing out all the trauma so that I could finally be, stop hurting or, I was clearing out all of this stuff so that I could finally enjoy the love and the worth and the value and the joy and the peace that was there the whole time that I couldn't see because of all this other stuff stacked on top of it. And then it becomes a whole different ball game. And then we keep doing it. And it doesn't mean we don't still run into really, rough spots. But we know, most of us know who have been doing this for long enough, know that when we hit those rough spots, you're my next layer. This is my next layer. And I always understand that on the other side of this possibly very hard thing is another layer of growth and perspective. It's almost like another room to my, it's another floor on my home, or another beautiful thing that gets built. And so I almost dare I say, I almost invite sometimes those triggers so that I can look back and be like, okay, what's the next lit layer? Now, that being said, there are times where I just want to break. Like, I just want to break because there's a lot of stuff happening and I don't want to be introspective. I don't want to look for patterns. And, I just want to feel sorry for myself or someone else to feel sorry for me. Like, do you see how hard my life is right now? And that's okay too. It's okay to, we come from a victimized mindset. It's okay to go home once in a while and this is hard and I need a hug and a popsicle and $5 million and then everything will be okay. It's okay to do that once in a while. We don't have to stay these yogi elevated, whatever all the time. It's okay to come to those places. And I think it's almost important to come back to those places sometimes because it doesn't feel as home as it used to. And that's important for it to feel less satisfying, to get sympathy, to get attention, to get validated by someone outside of you. There comes a point where those things you might still need them at times and they might still feel nice in the moment. But do this long enough and you'll start to feel like, that's kind of like eating chips for dinner. Every once in a while, it's great to eat chips for dinner, but it's not going to sustain you and you're going to be left hungry really quickly. So I think that it becomes like that over time, but you got to put the work in. You got to do the stuff. And it doesn't have to be hard and it doesn't have to take a long time and you can be supported in the process. That's what we've really built with Mind Change is many entry points, many ways to stay with it, many options when you hit these kind of tougher moments or layers, and also just a lot of ways to enjoy the view along the journey.
Right, because it's a lifestyle, not a program or a certain pill you need to take or a certain thing you need to do. It's a way of living.
Yeah. At least hopefully it is.
Hopefully.
When we do get people in, they're like, I got this problem. I did Mind Change. The problem's gone. Great. And they go on about their business. Sure. And that's fine. I mean, it's a glimpse into the ability, at least, that they can change. There's a heck of a lot of people out there doing stuff and they don't change for long if they do change. And so, I'll take that over no change or dumping a bunch of time and energy and money into something and not getting results. But what I'd love for people to do is to take this and start to understand that it's a way of being. It's a new way of thinking. And it's not actually new. So I will correct myself. It's almost returning back to that, back to what we knew when we first came in. Mm-hmm. We knew we were worth, without doing a thing, without lifting a finger. We knew we were worthy of love and attention and that someone was gonna do what they needed to do to make sure we not just survive but thrive. And we're gonna be well fed and we're gonna be well cared for. And then when we get into one or two, I'm the cutest thing that ever existed and everyone should look at me all the time and everyone should love me and I should have anything I want right now. That's that wild-eyed child view. But we didn't question our worth and value when we were little. We didn't expect hardship around it. We didn't worry. We weren't anxious. Our bodies did what it needed to do. I think it's just returning back to a relationship, mind, body, spirit that is in alignment.
Great. So if there was just one thing that you could advise, help, guide people when it comes to boundaries, if there was just one thing that okay, this is a takeaway and there's a million things, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Are they working for you? Are they getting you everything you thought?
Your current boundaries, whatever you think they are, whatever you've deemed as a boundary.
Or maybe you're someone who identifies as like, I've tried so hard, I can't keep boundaries, I'm boundaryless, I'm a people pleaser. Well, what if there's a good reason for that? What if you're not broken and unable to do boundaries? Maybe something inside of you is seeking something higher than a boundary. And get in and dig into those things. Find that. If you're someone who is like really boundaried up, and you're someone who smacks the hands of people when they cross your boundaries, is that your ultimate goal? Is having everyone do things the way you need them to be done? Is that your ultimate version of safety? Or could there be more?
Yeah.
And so we're not judging anybody here. We just want to invite people into a possible different perspective, possible different conversation around this. So boundaries are good if they're good, right? If what is being surrounded, if the boundary lines are holding in something amazing, but also allowing in, it's like a cellular membrane in one sense. It's like it just naturally, without even trying, deflects anything that's not going to serve them and allows in all the nurturing, wonderful, beautiful things.
Right.
So if it's more of a membrane or white picket fences, or however you do it, that make sure that you're not just doing it to keep bad out, because then we're focusing on bad. We have to focus on what bad looks like to make sure we know how to keep it out. And then that's going to create a reticular activating system will be honed in on that. And then to make sure that you've got it, you'll have to invite some bad in to make sure that, it's just there's a more fulfilling way if we allow it, I would say.
Well, thanks for this conversation.
Well, thanks for being here. And thank you for being open and willing to share sort of our history and the realness of what we've been through and are still working through.
Yeah.
Because I do think that that's helpful for people. So thank you.
Yeah.
And thank all of you for joining us once again on the Mind Change podcast. Remember, if you are looking for help, if this resonates with you in any way, if you are wanting to know more, there are so many ways to find an entry point in. So read the book, join a course, come to a retreat. We have lots of different options for you to learn more and see if this is something that you could put into practice to live your best life. So thanks again for joining us at Mind Change, where we endeavor to change the world one mind at a time.